At 8:33 local time, the Eastern Mediterranean is performing its standard late October impression of a body of water that has decided to be beautiful regardless of what is happening on or above its surface. The sky is clear. The sea is the specific deep blue that travel photographers use on covers and that sailors describe as deceptive. Because a body of water that looks this cooperative from the bridge has historically reserved the right to change its position without notice. Visibility is unlimited. The surface temperature is 24 degrees Celsius, which is the kind of temperature that makes everyone aboard a destroyer doing routine patrol work briefly question every life choice that brought them to a gray warship instead of a beach approximately 40 nautical miles to the north, where the coast of Crete is a faint line of geology against the morning horizon. USS Gravely, hull number D DG-107, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, is making 15 knots on a standard 6th Fleet patrol track through international waters in the Eastern Mediterranean. The ship returned from a scheduled maintenance availability at Suda Bay 41 hours ago, addressing 16 of 17 maintenance items. The 17th, a minor anomaly in the port shaft, bearing temperature sensor producing intermittent elevated readings, was assessed as a sensor calibration issue rather than a bearing condition. The bearing was fine. The sensor required monitoring every 15 minutes, logged, compared against direct mechanical assessment, operationally irrelevant in any normal sense. The Eastern Mediterranean is not always a normal operational environment. This is the kind of detail that does not appear in any operational brief. It appears in the engineering log, checked every 15 minutes by a petty officer who is doing his job, and it is operationally irrelevant in any normal sense of operationally irrelevant. The Eastern Mediterranean is not always a normal operational environment. On the bridge, the officer of the deck is managing a picture that includes 2 commercial vessels to the north on the Piraeus shipping route, a Greek Coast Guard patrol craft that has been in the same general location since 7 o'clock and is doing whatever Greek Coast Guard patrol craft do on a clear October morning, and at 8:33, a contact that the radar watch had flagged at 8:29 and that the officer of the deck has been watching for 4 minutes with the professional attention of a person who has seen this contact type before and has opinions about what it does next. The contact was bearing 270, inbound, large, making 22 knots on a direct heading that, if maintained, would put it at USS Gravely's position in approximately 31 minutes. It was a Udaloy-class destroyer. The AN/SPY-1D had classified it from the radar return before the officer of the deck finished his first sentence, confirmed 11 seconds later by the SLQ-32 from the MR-750 frigate Surface Search Radar Emission Profile, a signature the threat library recognizes with the casual confidence reserved for old acquaintances who have not changed their habits. The Udaloy had been operating in the Mediterranean for 43 days, tracking the 6th Fleet's operating area, with the institutional dedication of a Navy that shadows American surface combatants as standing operating procedure. This specific Udaloy had been assigned its own contact file 11 days ago when it first appeared and began doing what Udaloy-class destroyers do when an American ship is nearby. Follow it. The distance had been shrinking. 20 miles 4 days ago, 12 miles 2 days ago, 8 miles yesterday, 11 this morning at 22 knots, closing. The specific Udaloy on the display had been assigned its own contact file 11 days ago, when it first appeared at the eastern edge of the 6th Fleet's operating area and began doing what Udaloy-class destroyers do in the Mediterranean when an American surface combatant is nearby, which is follow it. Not aggressively, not at first, at a professional distance that said, in the language of naval shadowing, that the Russian ship was aware of the American ship and intended to remain aware of it, and that the American ship was welcome to draw its own conclusions about what that awareness implied. The distance had been changing. The Udaloy had been at 20 nautical miles 4 days ago, 12 miles 2 days ago, 8 miles yesterday evening. This morning at 8:29, it was at 11 nautical miles and closing at 22 knots, which is not the speed of a vessel that has decided to maintain a respectful observational distance. In the Combat Information Center, the Tactical Action Officer had the full picture. He had the contact file, the 11-day track record, the closure profile, and the intelligence assessment that described this specific Udaloy's recent operational behavior as increasingly assertive approach pattern, consistent with harassment protocol. He also had the engineering status board, which showed the port shaft bearing temperature sensor monitoring protocol in its active status, checked 7 minutes ago by the engineering petty officer. Reading within normal parameters. The commanding officer was on the bridge by 0837, 4 minutes after the contact's closure rate made his presence operationally appropriate. He looked at the contact. He looked at its bearing and speed. He looked at the engineering status board that the bridge team had pulled up at his standing instruction for all tactical contacts during any monitoring protocol. He said, with the economy of a commanding officer who has been doing this for a while, what's the maintenance assessment on the port shaft? Sensor anomaly, sir. Bearing assessed fine by direct inspection. Reading is monitoring normal. No operational restriction on shaft operation. He nodded once. He had made the same mental calculation the engineering officer had made and arrived at the same conclusion. The bearing was fine. The sensor was not. And the ship was not in any way restricted in its maneuvering. But the monitoring protocol required 15-minute checks, and the next check was in 9 minutes. And for the duration of those 9 minutes, the ship's engineering focus was partially allocated to something other than pure tactical maneuvering support. Not significantly, not operationally, but partially. The Udaloy was at 9 nautical miles, 22 knots, inbound. Now, the Udaloy-class destroyer, what it is and what the Eastern Mediterranean morning was about to teach everyone watching, about the relationship between design ambition and operational reality across a distance of 40 years. The Udaloy-class was designed to be the Soviet Navy's definitive answer to the submarine threat, a large, capable, fast anti-submarine warfare destroyer built around a sonar suite, 2 helicopters, and enough weapons to make any Western submarine's commanding officer think carefully about its tactical choices. At commissioning, each ship in the class represented a genuine investment in capability and a genuine statement of Soviet naval ambition. The design was serious. The engineering was sophisticated. The ships were real warships built by a naval industrial complex at the height of its Cold War confidence. That was the 1980s. This is now. The specific Udaloy had been commissioned in 1988, maintained, partially modernized, kept operational through the dissolution of the Soviet Union, through the years when the Russian Navy's budget caused Western analysts to wonder if it would survive as an operational entity, through the partial recovery of the 2000s and into the present moment, making 22 knots toward USS Gravely, trailing a smoke plume visible at 9 nautical miles. Not because the morning light was exceptional, because the Udaloy's engines were producing the exhaust signature of machinery that has covered many nautical miles and has developed opinions about clean combustion. The smoke trail was visible from space. This is not a figure of speech. Commercial satellite imagery of the Eastern Mediterranean taken at this hour, processed by any of the several services that offer near real-time tasking, would show a distinct atmospheric trace at this position, consistent with a vessel making speed with aged power plant. The Udaloy was not stealthy. The Udaloy had never been designed to be stealthy in the sense that modern surface combatants understand stealth. It had been designed to be powerful, which in 1988 was a different calculation. And it remained powerful in the specific sense that 43 days of continuous Mediterranean deployment demonstrates that the machinery, whatever its exhaust signature, was keeping the ship moving. The SLQ-32 had been building the Udaloy's electronic profile since 8/29. The MR-750 frigate surface search radar was being collected at improving signal quality. More interesting was the MG-335 bow sonar in active mode. Unusual at 22 knots because high-speed self-noise degrades the sonar's own performance, but the Udaloy's crew had decided to operate it actively. The SLQ-32 noted and logged this because the MG-335's active emission at close range produced collection quality the team described as very useful. The MP401 electronic warfare suite was also active, broadcasting its own search emissions, a system looking for American radars being cataloged by the American radar it was looking for. The Udaloy's electronic warfare suite was also active. The MP401 start system, the Udaloy's own electronic support measures suite, designed to detect and classify radar emissions, was broadcasting its search mode emissions with the specific frequency pattern that indicates a system looking for surface and air contacts. This was routine. What was not routine was that the MP401's emissions were themselves being collected by the SLQ-32, which means that the system designed to find American radars was being cataloged by the American radar it was looking for, and the catalog was getting more complete with every nautical mile the range closed. It is the electronic warfare equivalent of trying to find someone by making a lot of noise and not noticing that the noise is telling them exactly where you are. MP401 active. Full collection, the electronic warfare officer reported to the tactical action officer. MG335 bow sonar in active mode. Signal quality on the sonar emissions is excellent. We're getting the full active pulse pattern. Why is he running active sonar at 22 knots? The tactical action officer asked. The electronic warfare officer considered this for 2 seconds. Unclear, sir. Possibly protocol. Possibly he wants us to know his sonar is operational. A pause. The sonar is operational. We can confirm that. We're also going to have a much better characterization of its active pulse parameters than we had last week. The Udaloy's sonar was operational. The Udaloy was demonstrating this to a ship equipped to catalog every characteristic of that demonstration. This is the specific intelligence efficiency available in an aggressive shadowing operation conducted by a platform that runs its systems in active mode at close range. Short sentences now, because at 8:44 the range was 6 nautical miles and the Udaloy's course had not changed. The commanding officer was watching the contact on the bridge display. The contact was large, 8,000 tons of Soviet-designed destroyer, making 6 nautical miles of approach in approximately 16 minutes at current speed. The smoke trail was visible to the naked eye now, a faint gray line against the blue sky to the west. The bearing rate was 0. A bearing rate of 0 on a closing contact means the contact is on a collision course. The rules of the road apply. The situation requires action before it requires emergency action. And the distinction between those two things is approximately 4 nautical miles at these closure rates. The port shaft bearing temperature sensor had been checked 6 minutes ago. Normal. 3 minutes to the next check. A bridge to bridge. Channel 16. Identify and request intentions. The officer of the deck transmitted on Channel 16 in English, then in Russian. The Sixth Fleet's current linguistic coverage extends to ship-to-ship communication in the languages of the vessels it routinely encounters, identifying USS Gravely, stating its position and course, and requesting the oncoming vessel's intentions per the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. The response came back in Russian, without translation, which the linguist on the watch section provided within 40 seconds. The Udaloy identified itself, stated that it was conducting lawful naval operations in international waters, and noted that USS Gravely was operating in an area of Russian naval interest and should be aware of this. The response did not address the collision course geometry. The response did not state an intention to alter course. The response communicated, in the diplomatic language of vessels conducting deliberate proximity operations, that the Udaloy was aware of what it was doing and had decided to do it regardless of what USS Gravely thought about it. This is the specific challenge of an aggressive shadowing operation by a peer Navy surface combatant in international waters. The Udaloy was not threatening in the weapons employment sense. Nothing aboard the Udaloy constituted an imminent threat that the rules of engagement framed as requiring a defensive response. The Udaloy was threatening in the seamanship sense, which is a different category of problem requiring a different category of response, and the response category available to a guided missile destroyer in this situation is the one that has been available to ships since the physics of large objects moving through water were established, which is maneuver. The port shaft bearing sensor check, normal. 8 minutes to the next check. At 8:47, range 4.5 nautical miles, the commanding officer made his call. All ahead full. Come right 2 to 5 degrees. Full ahead on an Udaloy-class produces 30 knots. The turn to starboard and to the right opened the approach angle from head-on to crossing, which is geometrically the correct response to a vessel that will not give way in a head-on situation, and which, under the rules of the road, places the maneuvering obligation on USS Gravely as the vessel that altered course. It also produced a rate of separation between USS Gravely's new track and the Udaloy's current track that, at 30 knots versus 22 in a diverging angle, was resolving the collision geometry with the professional confidence of a ship that has more engine and better propulsion. The Udaloy responded. Not immediately. There was a pause of approximately 45 seconds between USS Gravely's course change and the Udaloy's first reaction, a pause that the electronic warfare officer noted because the command net traffic from the Udaloy increased sharply during that 45 seconds, which means the 45 seconds was a decision window rather than a reaction delay. Someone aboard the Udaloy was deciding something, and the decision took 45 seconds, and the decision was to alter course to starboard as well, maintaining the intercept geometry at the new angle, attempting to close the rate of separation that USS Gravely's acceleration had opened. An Udaloy at full power makes approximately 30 knots in optimal conditions. Optimal conditions in 2024 are meaningfully different from optimal conditions in 1988. The Udaloy surged to 27 knots. The SPY-1D tracked this with the accuracy it applies to everything. 27 versus 30 was a 3-knot deficit. 3 knots meant the separation rate was opening rather than closing. The intercept geometry was not maintaining. The smoke trail, already visible at 8 nautical miles, became considerably more pronounced at 27 knots. The smoke trail, already visible at 8 nautical miles, became considerably more pronounced at 27 knots. The exhaust output from an aged gas turbine plant, pushed to near maximum power in warm Mediterranean ambient air temperatures, produces the specific atmospheric result of a system working hard in conditions that warm ambient temperatures make harder, and the Udaloy's trail at 850 was visible, with enough clarity that the officer of the deck called it to the bridge team with the tone he uses for operationally relevant observations, which is the same tone he uses for all observations, because he has learned not to perform emotion in front of the watch section. Contact at 6 nautical miles, smoke trail clearly visible, separation rate increasing. On the weather deck, a boatswain's mate, who had been conducting a wire inspection on the starboard side, looked up from his work as USS Gravely came to full ahead and heeled slightly in the turn. He looked to the west, where the Udaloy was now visible on the horizon, a gray shape trailing a darker gray plume against the clear Mediterranean sky. He watched it for approximately 5 seconds. He had seen Russian ships before. He had seen them closer. He noted the smoke trail with the expression of a person who has developed strong professional opinions about machinery maintenance and is observing a data point consistent with those opinions. He went back to his wire inspection. The wire required his attention, and the Russian ship, whatever its intentions, was not going to be resolved by looking at it. Now, the intelligence value of the previous 23 minutes, assessed by the electronic warfare officer at 0852 when the separation had stabilized, and the tactical picture had returned to something that the watch section could manage from a standing posture rather than a forward lean. The MR750 frigate radar, full emission profile, updated frequency catalog against this hull, the MG335 active sonar, full pulse characterization at excellent signal quality, with parameters the threat library had listed as estimated since 2019, now confirmed from close range at active emission. The MP401 electronic support measures system, search mode profile, frequency agility pattern, sensitivity estimate from what the system focused on during the approach, and the command net, the 45-second decision window at 8:47, the traffic volume, the transmission timing, building a behavioral model of this commanding officer's decision cycle under pressure. The 45-second window is going to be useful, the electronic warfare officer told the executive officer during the post-contact brief at 0915. That's the gap between seeing a threat response and deciding to react. It tells us the decision cycle. If this ship is going to be in the same operating area as our assets next week, that 45 seconds is a planning input. What's the sonar characterization worth? The MG335 active parameters, we confirmed today, update a library entry that's been on estimated values since a 2019 collection that was at insufficient range for confirmation. At the range we got today, the signal quality is good enough that the analysis team will treat it as primary data rather than secondary. A pause. We also have the power plant data. SPY-1D tracked his top speed at 27.3 knots at what we assess was near maximum power in current ambient conditions. The published specification is 30. The delta is operationally significant if you're planning intercept geometry against this class. The executive officer noted this. She wrote it in the format that produces useful intelligence products rather than narrative observations, because the executive officer has strong opinions about the format of notes that will eventually become intelligence reports. And the note became, within 4 hours, part of the 6th Fleet's updated contact file on this specific hull, distributed to every U.S. and Allied surface combatant in the Mediterranean. The commanding officer at 9:22 was reviewing the incident report draft that the tactical action officer had prepared. The report was 6 pages. It described the approach, the geometry, the bridge-to-bridge communication, the course and speed change, the separation, and the electronic collection package. The report did not describe the smoke trail in operationally colorful terms because incident reports are not the venue for that. The intelligence annex was 4 pages and described the smoke trail in the technical language of passive infrared collection, which is considerably less colorful but considerably more useful. "What's the port shaft sensor reading?" the commanding officer asked. "Normal, sir. Every check since 8:30. The anomaly is assessed as sensor calibration. Log the checks. Complete the maintenance report when we're back in port." He signed the incident report draft. "Forward to 6th Fleet and 5th Fleet. Flag the 45-second decision window to EUCOM intelligence." He went back to the chart table. The eastern Mediterranean was still beautiful. The Udaloy was now 8 nautical miles to the southwest, paralleling USS Gravely's track at a separation that the approach geometry had established and the power plant reality had confirmed. The smoke trail was still visible. The collection was complete. The morning brief for the following day would include an updated contact file on the Udaloy's operational performance parameters that would make the next encounter, if there was a next encounter, begin from a more informed baseline. Here is the accounting the Udaloy's commanding officer would not have access to. He had conducted an aggressive approach that his ship's power plant had not fully supported. A 3-knot deficit at maximum power had turned an intercept into a separation, and 3 knots was not in any operational plan that assumed the published specification. He had generated, by running active sensors at close range, a comprehensive update to the U.S. Navy's technical characterization of both systems. He had provided a 45-second decision window now in every Allied planning file in the Mediterranean. And he had demonstrated, on the SPY-1D's impartial record, that his power plant in 2024 was not what the 1988 design specification described. Russian state television, by 1900 Moscow time, had a segment. The segment showed footage of Russian naval vessels operating in the Mediterranean, not from this specific encounter, because the footage from this encounter would not have been available in time, but archival footage of Udaloy-class destroyers making speed, looking powerful, looking capable, looking like the statement of naval ambition they had been designed to make in 1988. A commentator described the Russian Navy's Mediterranean presence as a demonstration of Russian resolve and operational capability, a counterbalance to American naval dominance in a sea that Russia's historical interests and strategic requirements placed within its area of concern. The commentary was professionally delivered. The archival footage was well chosen. The narrative was coherent. The footage did not include the smoke trail at 27 knots. The footage did not include the 45-second decision window. The footage did not include the 2.7-knot deficit from the published specification that the SPY-1D had measured with the disinterested accuracy of a system that does not editorialize about what it observes. The footage showed what Udaloy-class destroyers look like when they are being filmed for broadcast. The intelligence file showed what this specific Udaloy-class destroyer performs like when it is being asked to intercept a modern American guided missile destroyer in the eastern Mediterranean on a clear October morning. Both documents describe Russian naval capability. They describe it differently. One of them will be updated again the next time this hull appears on the 6th Fleet scope. The other will be rebroadcast with different narration depending on what else is happening in the news cycle. USS Gravely's engineering petty officer completed his port shaft bearing temperature sensor monitoring log at 1600 local time. Every entry read normal. The sensor had been generating anomalous readings intermittently since the Suda Bay maintenance availability and the engineering officers scheduled a calibration for the next port call, which was 12 days away. The calibration would resolve the anomaly. The bearing itself, assessed at direct inspection to be in acceptable condition, remained in acceptable condition throughout. The monitoring protocol had generated 47 log entries over the course of the day. One of those entries occurred at 8:38 during the approach phase and recorded a reading that was, like all the others, normal. The port shaft bore no fault. The bearing required no repair. The sensor required calibration. The maintenance log was accurate. And if the Udaloy's intelligence assessment of USS Gravely's operational status had somehow included the information that the port shaft bearing temperature sensor was generating anomalous readings, a detail that would have appeared in the engineering log, not the operational brief, accessible to no collection method, available to a surface ship approaching from 9 nautical miles, the approach would have looked, from the Udaloy's perspective, like an opportunity. The engineering log entry at 8:38 read, normal. The Eastern Mediterranean remained beautiful. The smoke trail dissipated by 10:30. Some things leave marks and some things do not. Bye for now.